Today we're starting a new summer sermon series called That's in the Bible. Gotta love Dorothy. This series continues from now through the beginning of August, and we're going to cover all kinds of topics in this series. And some of these topics will be very pastoral care in nature, some will be very social justice oriented, some will be both. This one today is very much about social justice, and I'm always really aware as a pastor, whenever I share a sermon that's really focused on social justice, that people come into worship with all kinds of things in our hearts, don't we? Sometimes we're in a joyful place, sometimes we're in a really broken place, we're in a lot of pain, sometimes we're somewhere in between, and what we need is a word from God, and to feel like God is really with us. And so, although the sermon today is a lot about economic justice, it's really about the truth that none of us is ever alone, that we are all in this together with God. And so whatever you bring with you to this time of worship today, I hope that that message will come through, and in that will be comfort and strength for all of us, wherever we are today. As long as I live, I will never forget the single most shocking moment I ever experienced when I was in seminary. There I was, still a very good Baptist girl, not even out to myself yet, sitting at my desk in my dorm room at Golden Gate Baptist Theological Seminary, just north of San Francisco, a Southern Baptist school. I had just started my very first class on the Hebrew Scriptures, and one of our first reading assignments was from the book of Leviticus. I read the passage that we had been assigned to read, and then I sat there, utterly dumbfounded. I was so convinced that what I was reading was wrong and could not possibly be from God, that I literally thought, and I am not kidding in the least when I say this, I literally thought someone had stolen my Bible and replaced it with this piece of heresy that I had just read. I kept telling myself, I've been attending Sunday school for years. And let me tell you, Baptists take their Sunday school very seriously. And I get a witness to that. I had been attending Sunday school for years, and in all those years, no one had ever told me about what I had just read. So naturally, it must not have been there, right? Someone stole my Bible and gave me this fake copy. But here's the thing. As I was soon to find out, no one had stolen my Bible. What I had read was really there. And I, like millions of Christians around the world, had absolutely no clue whatsoever that this passage was even in this Bible that I had been studying for so long. And just what was this mystery passage? It was the one we heard this morning from the 25th chapter of Leviticus, all about this strange thing called the Year of Jubilee. The Year of Jubilee, mentioned in the Bible only this once, as in a descriptive way anyway, from the 25th chapter of Leviticus. The Year of Jubilee was something decreed by God that was to happen only once every 50 years. And in each 50th year, all those who were slaves were to be set free, and all property, mostly agricultural land, was to be returned to its original owner. And the purpose of the Year of Jubilee was to balance out the distribution of wealth in ancient Israel, to make sure that all of the land didn't end up in only the hands of the few, the 1%, as we might call them, and to prevent anyone from living hopelessly in debt and servitude for their whole life. Now, why, you may be asking, was this Year of Jubilee concept so shocking, even upsetting to me? It was because it was so completely against much of what I had been taught about God. I had been raised to believe that the United States was God's country, that we were God's people, that we were to be a light to the world, to bring democracy and capitalism wherever we went, along with our Bibles and our churches. And in fact, I think it's pretty safe to say that I was pretty much taught that God was a capitalist. And that, of course, anyone who doesn't support capitalism was a godless communist. At least that's how it was back then. Today, probably it would be more like a godless socialist. Now, I have to admit, as a 22-year-old seminary student, I didn't exactly have an advanced understanding of international economics and capitalism. But I at least knew that at its core, capitalism was about private ownership and the rights of private owners. Are you still with me? Don't glaze over. This really is so important. I promise. How about capitalism? What is happening here? I knew that capitalism was about private ownership, and I really knew as I sat there at my desk in my dorm room that night that nothing could be further from capitalism than what I was reading that God had decreed for the people of Israel in the 25th chapter of Leviticus. Just think about it. It works like this, the year of Jubilee. Carlos, you decide that you are going to buy a house from Pauline. And so you take out a 20-year mortgage. And in those 20 years, you never miss a payment. You pay it off, and at the end of 20 years, the house is yours. And you're so proud. Except that that 20th year falls in a year of Jubilee. Do you know what that means? It means the house goes back to Pauline. That's the year of Jubilee. It means that Christopher, you could borrow $250,000 from Jeremiah. Jeremiah gives you a loan. And you say, Jeremiah, to work off this loan, I will be your private assistant until the loan is paid off. And you do that for, say, 3 years. Let's say you pay off $150,000 of the loan. But that third year is the year of Jubilee. Guess what, Jeremiah? You get to forgive the rest of Christopher's debt. Yay. That's the year of Jubilee. Can you see now why I was so stunned? Can you imagine what Wall Street might think about this little Jubilee concept? Well, apparently the children of Israel struggled with it just a bit too, because there is no record whatsoever anywhere in the Hebrew Scriptures that the year of Jubilee was actually followed. That doesn't mean it wasn't, it just means we have no record of it, which I think says something. These few verses in Leviticus were enough to rock my theological world, because they made me question, out of the blue, all of a sudden, everything I had been taught about God and about what God really cared about. These verses were my very first acquaintance with the single most prevalent theme in all of the Hebrew Scriptures, a theme I never learned about in Sunday school, and that theme is this: God's constant desire and command for compassion and the creation of economic justice for those who suffer in poverty. It is in the Hebrew Scriptures more than anything else combined. Over and over again in the Hebrew Scriptures, God speaks out against the oppression of the poor that was rampant in the life of Israel. And that's just in the Hebrew Scriptures. Over time, I learned something else I was never taught in Sunday school, and that's about what was in the New Testament. But in the New Testament, Jesus talks about money and wealth and what our relationship should be to it more than any other topic, with the exception of the topic of the dominion of God. In his inaugural sermon in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus proclaims what he came for. Does anyone remember what it is? He came to proclaim good news for the poor and to proclaim what he called the acceptable year of the Lord. And the acceptable year of the Lord is a phrase that means the year of Jubilee. That's what Jesus came for. And over again, he spoke against the oppression of the poor and the accumulation of wealth at the expense of others, and about spending our lives accumulating wealth, focusing only on that instead of taking care of one another. And after the resurrection, it was Jesus' teachings about economic justice and loving one another as we love ourselves that radicalized his disciples and the followers who were to come after that first Pentecost of the church that we celebrated last Sunday. Marion also read a passage from the 4th chapter of the book of Acts, and that one might be just as surprising as those words from Leviticus, because it tells us that after the first Pentecost of the church, all of the believers were so connected in heart and soul to one another that they held all of their possessions in common so that no one would be in need. Can you picture that? Just for a moment. I don't know about you, but when I think about this passage, for some reason it's so close after the resurrection, I still tend to think of Jesus and the 12 disciples and a small band of followers. But that's not where it was by then. By the 4th chapter of Acts, the church was 5,000 to 7,000 people. That's big enough to be called a megachurch today. That's big enough to be called Christ Fellowship today. Can you imagine all of the folks at Christ Fellowship selling their homes and their cars and cashing in their life insurance policies and their bonds and their mutual funds and pooling it all together to meet all the needs of everyone in their congregation, as well as the Christians who go to the churches in Riviera Beach and in Belle Glade? Oh, and by the way, this church. For that matter, can you imagine any of us at this church doing such a thing? This is exactly what was happening in those first golden days of what was eventually to become known as the Christian church. But here we are today, over 2,000 years since that first Pentecostal birthday of the church, and we live in a world that's very different now. It's not that poverty wasn't rampant back then, because it certainly was, but it couldn't possibly have been on the scale we know it today. 1/3 of the entire human population of the planet Earth lives in dire poverty in slums without access to adequate nutrition or even clean water. 1 in every 4 children here in the United States lives in poverty. And U.S. families are the fastest growing segment of America's homeless population. Even here at our own food pantry, where a year ago we were serving over about 1,400 people a month, I believe. Just a year later, now it's up to over 2,500 people a month. If you and I call ourselves followers of Jesus, who was himself Jewish and a believer in the concept of the year of Jubilee, what are we supposed to do? What is our response supposed to be to those who are suffering in poverty? Should we declare and live by a year of Jubilee? Well, if we think the Occupy Wall Street movement caused a bit of a stir, what would that do? Should we hold all of our possessions in common and sell all of our property and pool everything to make sure no one lacks for anything among us? We could. But you know, the truth is that ended up not even working out very well for that first church in Jerusalem. You know, by the 11th chapter of the book of Acts, the church in Jerusalem was so impoverished that they needed donations from other Christian communities around them to stay afloat. It seems they gave away so much that they ended up creating more need, the very need they had hoped to eliminate. We could decide to go all hardcore American and declare that God really is a capitalist and just kind of forget about the Bible. Some churches like to do that. Or we could allow ourselves to be paralyzed by it all and the seeming reality that in this huge world of misery and greed and economic strife, there's just really nothing we can do. Anyone ever feel like that? I know I'm not the only one. Except that here's the deal. We weren't put on this earth to be paralyzed or to live in defeat or despair. Because the God we serve is not a God of despair, but a God of hope and a God of good news. And the good news for us today is that in this moment, we don't have to figure it all out right now. Discipleship is a lifelong journey. It is a journey of making one choice at a time and taking one step at a time. And the important thing is our willingness and our open-heartedness to make the journey and to see where the Holy Spirit will lead us and to be willing to go where it will lead. Now, I will be the first to admit that is a dangerous thing to do. But it's a more hopeful thing than paralysis, don't you think? There are 2 important steps in this journey that we can choose to take if we will. And the first one is this. We can choose to live our lives in a state of humility and gratitude. According to ancient Jewish teachings, one of the purposes of the year of Jubilee was to remind the children of Israel that they were not owners of the land, they were tenants on the land. They were God's tenants. The land never belonged to them. It was God's all along. The same thing is true for us today. Abba may sing all at once about it's a rich man's world, and a lot of folks might think so, but in the end, it's not. It's God's world. And we are here because of God's grace. Everything we have, everything we say we own, comes from God. We are not the owners, we are the tenants. In our world where we are devouring and exploiting the earth's resources faster than our beautiful planet can produce them, isn't this a mindset that's needed? How might our world be different if we actually received and consumed and gave back with humility? If we aren't going to observe the year of Jubilee, we can at least remember that the blessings we enjoy come from God. They've been given to us, and they've been given to us so that we might share them with others with gratitude and with grace. It's not exactly the Vine Street we'll ever find on Wall Street, but then again, the church is supposed to be different from Wall Street, isn't it? Can I get an amen on that one? Amen. It may not be the mindset of Wall Street, but it's definitely the mindset and the heart set that God calls us to have. And the second step is this. We must remember that Christianity is not about a set of rules. It's not about making any of us feel guilty, so guilty sitting here for what we have, that we are paralyzed into doing nothing. Christianity is about abundant life. And abundant life begins and continues and ends. All of Christianity is about one thing. It's about relationship. Being in relationship with God and with ourselves and with one another. This is why Jesus said that the commandment to love God with all your being and to love your neighbor as yourself, it fulfills all of the law and the prophets. It's the only thing that matters. That's it. And if we live from that truth, everything changes. Every single one of us is connected to one another. Every single one of us in this room is connected to the children who are living on the trash heaps in India, to the people who come here on Thursdays who don't have enough to eat. We are connected right in this moment to one another. And once we understand this, once our hearts are open to living like we really believe in this connection, God can do all kinds of things in us and through our lives to alleviate the suffering of others and to create justice in our world and to bring us into the fullness of abundant life, because I guarantee that's how we get there. There is no abundant life without believing and nurturing our connection to one another. Whenever I think about this truth, about how relationship is everything in Judaism and Christianity, I remember a story a colleague told me several years ago. And it's a story that to this day helps me. It helps me to remember how it is that God wants me to live. Do we have Nordstrom department store here? Mm-hmm. Everyone know about Nordstrom? Mm-hmm. It's not Kmart, right? No. This story is about a woman who was an associate pastor of a large Presbyterian church in Southern California. And this woman, this minister, she loved to go to Nordstrom department store, mostly for the ambiance and the beautiful things that were there, because she really couldn't afford to actually buy anything there. And one of her visits there, this minister was on the top floor of the store admiring just some beautiful, beautiful dresses, some of the most beautiful and expensive she'd ever seen. When out of the elevator stopped on the floor, the door opened, and a woman came out of the elevator who was very disheveled looking. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and her hair was matted, and her stockings were rolled down to her ankles, and she didn't smell so good. She stood there holding a very full, very dirty gym bag, and it was obvious that she was in no shape to buy any of those dresses. The minister was expecting a security guard to come along any moment and show the woman to the door, but instead a stately saleswoman came up to the gym bag woman and asked, "May I help you, madam?" And the woman said loudly, Yeah, I want to buy a dress." "Any particular kind of dress?" the saleswoman asked. "A party dress," the woman answered. "Well, you've come to the right place," said the saleswoman. "I think we have some of the most beautiful party dresses in all the world." And this minister watched from afar as the saleswoman spent the next 15 minutes matching the dresses with the woman's skin color and eye color, trying to help her find just the right match. And after selecting 3 dresses, the saleswoman said, "Shall we go and try them on?" So they went to the dressing room, and the minister followed along behind because she just had to see how this was going to turn out. She scurried into the adjoining dressing room, and she put her ear up next to the wall. What ministers do. No one's looking. She had to hear what was going to happen next. The woman with the gym bag tried on all of the dresses with the saleswoman's help. But after about another 15 minutes, the woman said very abruptly, "I've changed my mind. I'm not going to buy a dress today." The minister in the adjoining cubicle was holding her breath, waiting to see what would happen, when she heard the saleswoman say in a very gentle voice, "That's all right, but here's my card. Should you come back to Nordstrom, I do hope you'll ask for me. I would consider it such a privilege to wait on you again." Now, no one saw that saleswoman do that. It was in a dressing room. She wasn't doing it as a performance for anyone. And I don't know what the saleswoman does when she isn't working at Nordstrom. I like to think that she's a member of a church or a synagogue or a mosque, but I'll never know. But what I do know is that she understands far more about the Bible than I ever did when I first started seminary. And I also have to say that I've struggled and struggled to figure out how to finish the sermon. And I think I finally figured out this morning that I can't figure out the ending because it doesn't have one. All I know is that how this salesperson treated this woman, who was obviously suffering a great deal in mental illness and poverty, is everything about what Christianity is supposed to be. And there's a next step. You know, there's the step of asking why. Why does this woman not have the mental services she needs? Why is she living on the street? What can be done about that? And we can certainly be a part of that answer, and we're called to be a part of that answer, but it all begins with the condition of our heart and our understanding about what's really in the Bible. Amen.